At the end of June 2023, as the sun was setting, 38-year-old James Monroe drove past the Willow Creek Mall on the outskirts of Dallas. He had been running errands all day, picking up tools for the garage where he had worked as a mechanic in recent years. A former military man, James was very observant, and outside the mall he noticed his wife, Michelle, 36, looking for someone. A man approached her tall, slender, wearing a tailored navy jacket. They came close, their body language intimate. When James parked and got out of the car, the man hugged Michelle tightly. She leaned her head against his chest, and her hands clutched at his jacket. "Michelle!" James exclaimed sharply. The woman recoiled, her cheeks flushed. "James, what are you doing in this neighborhood?" James' eyes narrowed as he looked between his wife and the stranger. "Just passing through," he said. Michelle stammered, then gestured to the man. "This is Alex. He's my brother. He lived in Europe for many years." James raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Your brother?" He held out his hand to the man. "That's strange, I don't recall ever hearing of you." Alex accepted the handshake with a trained smile. "Nice to meet you, James. Michelle always spoke very highly of you." "Europe, huh?" James asked coldly. "What part?" "Mostly Paris, but I've also been to Milan, London, and Brussels," Alex replied calmly. "But I'm back home now, with my family." James stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "Yeah. Sounds busy." Michelle quickly interjected, her voice too cheerful. "Oh, it's been ages since we met. Alex and I were just reminiscing. Anyway, honey, we have to go. I have dinner plans tonight. Let's go home." James took one last look at Alex before letting Michelle get into her car. Alex stayed behind them, his expression unreadable as he watched them drive away. Back at their home on Oakwood Avenue in East Dallas, James couldn't shake a feeling of unease. In all the years they had been married, Michelle had barely mentioned the fact that she had a brother, and Alex's sudden appearance seemed out of place. Michelle, sensing his suspicion, did her best to allay it by cooking his favorite dinner and telling him excitedly about Alex's exciting life abroad. At home, the couple were greeted by their boisterous 10-year-old twins, Ben and Lizzie, and their adopted niece, Emily, 17. Emily had been adopted by Michelle and Alex 5 years ago after her parents died in a fatal car accident. While James had acted as a reliable, if sometimes abusive, father, Michelle's warmth often seemed forced, a polished veneer masking a deeper alienation. Now Emily's gaze slid between her aunt and uncle at the dinner table, noticing Michelle deftly deflecting James's question. "So why haven't I met Alex before?" James asked, his fork hanging in midair. "Well," Michelle began, her laugh light and dismissive, "he's always been very busy. He's a workaholic, like you. Actually, we've only recently reconnected." James grumbled, unconvinced. Emily watched him carefully, stopping the conversation. Late on Friday, July 5, a week after Alex's surprise visit, Emily was studying for her final exam when she heard voices coming from upstairs. She wondered where they were coming from, knowing that her uncle had been away that night and that the twins had been sent to their grandmother's for the holidays. She tiptoed out of the room, her heart pounding, and crouched down by the stairs to listen. "Alex, we have to be careful," Michelle hissed. "James is already suspicious." "Relax," Alex replied in a low, even voice. "I have everything under control." Emily looked over the railing, her breath caught as she saw Alex and Michelle standing side by side. Alex put his arm around her aunt's waist, pulling her close to him, and Michelle made no resistance. That night, Emily couldn't sleep, wondering how a sibling could act like this. So she began to search for the truth. Maybe Alex wasn't her aunt's brother, Emily thought. Emily's first step was to dig through Michelle's old college memorabilia. Michelle had always been proud of her time at the University of Texas at Austin, occasionally sharing photos and stories from her days in the drama club. Emily hoped that these memories might lead to someone who could shed light on Michelle's past. She found a photo album from Michelle's youth, which had many college photos in it. One of the photos showed her aunt and another girl. They must have been friends, Emily thought. As she flipped through the photo, she saw the caption, Michelle's best friends Edison and Sandra Blake. Sandra's name flashed through her mind. She had heard Michelle mention her once, many years ago, at Thanksgiving dinner. Emily hesitated, but decided to take the risk. The next day, she found Sandra in Austin through social media. Pretending to be researching a family tree project, Emily sent Sandra a message, explaining that she was interested in learning about her aunt's family from the outside. After chatting, Emily learned that Michelle was the only child in the family. The confirmation sent shivers down Emily's spine. They were lying, so Alex really was her aunt's lover. In a fit of emotion, Emily ran out into the living room, where Michelle and Alex were sitting on the couch. Their uncle was at work, which was why they were acting so calm. Emily threw the photo album in Michelle's direction. "Emily, what are you doing?" Michelle exclaimed in alarm. "I need to talk to you, Aunt Michelle," Emily said in an even voice, despite the fear running through her veins. She glanced at Alex, who leaned back casually, as if forcing her to speak. "What's going on?" Michelle asked in a worried tone. Emily held up a photo of Michelle and Sandra. "I was talking to your friend from college. She told me you don't have a brother. So who is he?" She pointed at Alex, raising her voice. Michelle's face paled. "Emily, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Emily shouted, her anger boiling. "I saw you two that night. You're lying to Uncle James. You're lying to everyone." Michelle opened her mouth to respond, but Alex suddenly stood up, his calm mask replaced by cold fury. "You don't know what you're talking about, girl," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I know enough," Emily replied. "I know you've been sneaking around, and I know you're lying about who you are. I'm going to tell Uncle James." Panic flared in Michelle's eyes as she grabbed Emily's hand. "Emily, stop it. Please let me explain." But Alex had had enough. He stepped forward and pushed Emily hard. The force sent Emily stumbling backward. She tripped over the edge of the rug, her arms flailing as she fell. Her head hit the sharp corner of the coffee table with a sickening thud. The room fell dead silent. Emily lay motionless on the floor, her lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Michelle screamed, rushing to Emily, but it was too late. Blood pooled under the teenager's head, staining the carpet. "Oh my God, Alex! What have you done? What did you do?" Alex's face turned yellow. "She left us no choice," he said coldly. "If she had told James. She was just a child." Michelle sobbed. "What are we going to do?" Alex crouched down, examining Emily's body with incredible detachment. "We'll say it was an accident," he said. "James doesn't have to know the truth." The weight of Emily's dead body on the floor was unbearable. Michelle shivered as Alex grabbed her shoulders, his voice low and strong. "We need to act now," he hissed. "Call an ambulance. Tell her it was an accident." Michelle stared at the blood pooling under Emily's head, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't take her eyes off the teenager's still face. She's gone," Michelle whispered softly. Alex leaned closer, his tone implacable. "It's not our decision. The medics will handle this. Get a grip, Michelle." With shaking hands, Michelle reached for the phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked calmly. "This is Michelle Monroe," Michelle stammered. "My niece, Emily," she tripped and hit her head. "There's blood. She's not moving." The operator's tone changed to urgency. Stay on the line, ma'am. Is she breathing? I don't know, Michelle stammered, her voice cracking. What's your address? The operator asked. 2530, Oakwood Avenue, Michelle said nervously. We've sent help to you, the operator assured her. The ambulance and the police will be here soon. Michelle's heart sank. The police. She shot Alex a desperate look. We'll get through this, he said firmly. Just stick to the story. The lights of the ambulance and the patrol car illuminated the Monroe house. The paramedics rushed in, finding Emily sprawled on the living room floor. Alex wiped his hands on a tea towel, trying to calm his nerves, while Michelle sat on the couch, shaking uncontrollably. A few minutes later, a police officer entered, his presence making Michelle's stomach churn. But she recognized him immediately, Officer Craig Foster, her father's longtime partner on the police force. What happened here? Craig asked, his tone gruff but professional. She was running, Michelle said, her voice breaking. She tripped on the carpet and hit her head on the table. As the paramedics lifted Emily's body onto a stretcher, Michelle covered her face with her hands. Alex stepped forward, his expression reserved. It all happened so fast, he said in a flat voice. We're still in shock. Craig's eyes narrowed, a look of suspicion on his face. I need a full statement from both of you, he said, pulling out his notebook. After the police left, Michelle immediately called her dad, retired police captain Richard Edison. Even though he'd left the force 5 years ago, his influence on Dallas law enforcement was strong. If anyone could help her, it was him. Michelle? Richard's familiar voice answered. Something wrong. You're calling too late, daughter. Dad, her voice trembled. Emily tripped on the carpet and hit the edge of the table. She left. The police were here, and I'm worried they'll be looking for something that wasn't there and couldn't be. I need your help. Please, Dad. I could lose it all, my life could end. Do you understand? Richard sighed heavily. I'll make a few calls, he said in a calm voice. But I hope you're telling me the truth, Michelle. Don't you? Of course, Michelle lied. It was just an accident. By morning, Richard had pulled strings with his contacts at the Dallas Police Department. The incident was officially called a tragic accident, no charges were filed. Craig Foster, who was assigned to the case, reluctantly closed it after reviewing Michelle and Alex's fabricated statements. For a while, it seemed like the crisis had passed. Alex assured Michelle that they had weathered the storm, but deep down she felt the weight of her guilt growing. Every time she looked at the bloodstain on the carpet, she heard Emily's voice accusing her of betrayal, thoughts that tormented Michelle constantly. So she had to get rid of the carpet, as a reminder of terrible things. The days after Emily's death were a blur for James Monroe. Grief consumed him, the relentless pain in his chest did not subside. When his brother and his wife had been in a car accident 5 years earlier, Emily's mother Laura had died on the spot, and her father William had been in the hospital for some time. On his deathbed James had promised his brother that he would protect Emily, that he would give her a stable home and a happy future. And now she was gone, her life cut short in the house that had been designed for her safety. The living room was stuffy, the silence unbearable. Unable to sit still, he was dragged into Emily's room. The room was just as Emily had left it, textbooks scattered across the table, posters of her favorite bands on the walls, and a framed photo of her parents on the nightstand. James picked up the photo, touching the glass with his thumb. His reflection stared back at him with eyes filled with pain. His gaze drifted to Emily's laptop, which lay closed on the desk. Something inside it called to him. He sat up and opened the lid. The screen lit up instantly, and James froze. An email conversation was open, a thread between Emily and someone named Sandra Blake. He gasped as he read it. Asterisk, Hi, Sandra, this is your college friend Michelle Edison's niece. Remember her? Asterisk. Asterisk, yeah, sure, Michelle and I were best friends in college and for a few years after. Then we all had our own lives, so we didn't talk much. Asterisk. Asterisk, I need your help. I have a family tree project, so I would like to learn more about my aunt's family. Asterisk. Asterisk, of course, she is the only daughter of her parents, Richard and Kira Edison, and there were grandparents on her mother's side, but I don't know if she is still alive. Asterisk. Asterisk, what about brothers or sisters? Asterisk. Asterisk, no. I'm saying she's the only daughter in the family. Asterisk. James's hands clutched the edges of the laptop, and a fire broke out in his chest. Alex was not Michelle's brother. The thought raged through his mind, his anger growing with each repetition. He thought about Michelle's shaky explanations, her evasive glances, all of which now had the tinge of betrayal. And he couldn't just break up after that, that wouldn't be James. All he wanted now was revenge. So he wanted to scare Michelle. Being a military man, he knew that people feared death the most and would do anything to stay alive. He stood up abruptly, but calmly went out into the yard. He told Michelle that he wanted to get some fresh air and asked her to go for a ride with him. Still under the influence of recent events, she hesitated, but eventually agreed. The road was tense, and a thick silence fell between them. Michelle looked nervously at James, who was driving further out of town, his hands clutching the steering wheel. "Where are we going?" she finally asked in a small voice. "You'll see, we'll be there soon," James answered shortly. They reached a secluded spot in the forest, far from the noise of civilization. James parked the car, gesturing for Michelle to follow him. As she stepped onto the dirt path, James opened the glove compartment and pulled out a worn duffel bag. From it, he took out the pistol he had been issued after serving in the army. Michelle froze, her face darkening. "James, what are you doing?" He turned to her, his face stern and his voice steely. "You're going to tell me the truth. Right here, right now." Michelle's knees buckled slightly, and she raised her hands in defense. "James, please." Tears welled up in Michelle's eyes as she backed away. It was an accident, Alex accidentally pushed her and she fell. What he heard finally broke James. He just wanted to take revenge on his wife for her betrayal, but at the same time he learned a terrible secret about his niece's death. His hand trembled, he pulled the trigger and shot Michelle. Her lifeless body fell to the grass. The forest was eerily quiet. James dropped the gun, his hands shaking violently. He looked down at Michelle's crumpled body. After losing his wife, he was very angry with Alex, so he didn't hesitate to go to his house for the ultimate revenge. On the way, he called an ambulance to the spot where he had killed his wife. The rhythmic thump of the engine was the only sound as James drove through the quiet streets of Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in southwest Dallas. His knuckles on the steering wheel were white, his chest heaving with the weight of what he had done. Michelle's blood was still on his hands, literally and figuratively. He knew where Alex was staying. Michelle remembered the small rental house on St. George Drive when she first told him about Alex's visit. Now, as James turned onto the street, he imagined Emily's laughter, her wide, trusting eyes, and that terrible moment when he realized he had failed to protect her. The house loomed ahead, a nondescript one-story structure. James parked on the side of the road, breathing heavily. He got out of the car, took a wrench from the toolbox in the back seat, and headed for the door. The door was unlocked. James pushed it open and saw Alex. Alex didn't have time to ask anything before James's fist came into contact with his jaw. "You killed her," James growled, standing over him. "You killed my niece." Alex tried to get up, but James grabbed him by the shirt, delivering another blow that sent Alex's head flying back. His eyes fluttered as he fell unconscious, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. James's breathing was ragged as he stared at Alex's limp body. He wasted no time in pulling Alex over to a wooden chair in the dining area. In a drawer, James found duct tape, which he used to securely bind Alex's hands and feet. James went outside and opened the trunk of his car, taking out the red can of gasoline he had saved for emergencies. Back at the house, he began pouring the fuel in long, deliberate jets over the floor, the furniture, and finally over Alex, who began to stir. Alex's eyes widened, his confusion turning to panic as he realized his situation. "James, wait. Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," James said coldly, pouring gasoline over Alex's chest. "You're crazy," Alex shouted, struggling against the ropes. "You're going to jail for this." James's face twisted into a bitter smile. "Prison is nothing compared to what Emily went through. Nothing compared to the hell you brought to my home." He struck a match. The small flame danced in his fingers, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "No. No." Alex's screams were cut short as James threw the match onto the gasoline-soaked floor. The flames roared, climbing the walls and engulfing the room in seconds. James turned and walked out of the house, the heat of the fire pressing against his back. James sat on the grass across the street, his head in his hands, watching the house burn. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, their screams filling the air as someone called 911. The distant wails of sirens grew louder, and soon firefighters were battling hell. Police cars surrounded the scene, their lights flashing eerily against the smoky sky. James didn't move. He sat in the grass, his face blank, his soul empty. When the police approached him, he raised his hands without resistance. "You are under arrest for arson and double murder," one of them said, pulling his hands behind his back to handcuff him. James nodded silently. As he was led away, he looked back at the burning house, watching the flames consume the remains of his once peaceful life. James's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, his fingerprints on the gasoline canister, eyewitness accounts of him leaving the house, and Alex's charred remains found tied to a chair, as well as the body of his wife, Michelle, for whom James himself had called an ambulance. His defense attorney argued for leniency, citing James's grief and the loss of Emily as mitigating factors. But the prosecution painted a different picture, a man consumed by rage, ready to take justice into his own hands. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "We find the defendant guilty of double murder and arson," the foreman announced. The judge sentenced James to life in prison without parole. James was transferred to Huntsville, one of the oldest and most brutal prisons in Texas. His days became a monotonous blur of food, shifts, and the clanking of metal doors. But at night, memories came. Emily's laughter, her bright, curious eyes. The way she had trusted him to protect her. He also beat himself up for the broken lives of his twins. Now they were with their grandmother, safe and far from the horrors that had happened. But at 10, the children were complete orphans, told that their mother was a traitor and their father a murderer. What future would they have? In the quiet hours of his cell, James began writing letters to his children. "Dear Ben and Lisa. I know you'll hate me when you're old enough to understand what happened. I don't blame you. I hated myself long before I was put in this position. But I want you to know that every decision I made was made out of love, even if it was wrong. I failed Emily, I failed you, and I will carry that failure with me every day. But I swear to you, I will never stop trying to be better. Be smart, help each other out, and remember that you are forever brother and sister."